Good evening, everyone. My name is Ware Harmon, and I'm the Executive Director of Town Hall Seattle. On behalf of our organization and our partners tonight at Third Place Books, it's a pleasure to welcome you to this evening's conversation with Elliott Young and Myra Machado. As we get underway, I want to acknowledge that our institution stands on the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, and particularly the Duwamish. We thank them for our continuing use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. And we thank you all for tuning in on this auspicious day. Town Hall is sincerely grateful for the opportunity to sustain our program of issues, ideas, and creativity, even when circumstances keep us from doing it under the same roof. We've built quite an online catalog of events over the last 10 months, and honestly, over the 5 to 6 years prior. And if you decide Town Hall is exactly the rabbit hole for you, you'll find lots more to enjoy on our website under the header Digital Media. But back to tonight's program, which will last about an hour, including audience Q&A. Questions will be selected from those submitted in the Ask a Question field at the bottom center of your screen. For viewers who want to watch this broadcast with closed captioning, we recommend viewing the stream via our YouTube page. The link is there in the chat, and we can also take questions submitted through the YouTube chat. We cannot guarantee we'll be able to address every question, but we'll try to get to as many as possible, so keep them concise, and as we like to say, in the form of a question. Town Hall is adding new events and podcasts every day. Upcoming programs include a look at the extraordinary legacy of Kubota Gardens, told through reflections by local artists and community members. The next installment in our long-running partnership with the Institute for Systems Biology. It's a program on the ways the pandemic will permanently alter our healthcare system, featuring Rod Hotchman in conversation with ISB Director Jim Heath. Harvard astronomer Avi Loeb on the very first confirmed signs of interstellar visitors to Earth. And two very distinct sides of Town Hall's music programming. The first, the debut concert in our 2021 Global Rhythm series, this year devoted to island culture, featuring the music of Okinawa from Seattle-based artists Mako and Manjuro. And the second, the latest installment, that is, I think, the 10th annual Mozart Birthday Toast, headlined by local Baroque music star Byron Schenkman and friends. Town Hall's work is made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. Civics programs in particular are supported by the Real Networks Foundation, the True Brown Foundation, KUOW, the Norcliffe Foundation, and the Wyncote Foundation Northwest. But as most of you know, Town Hall is at heart a member-supported organization, and I want to thank all of our members watching tonight. As for the rest of you, if you share Town Hall's commitment to a community invigorated by arts and ideas, made accessible to as many as possible, we hope you'll consider a membership or even just a contribution as well. One last piece of infomercial. You will certainly want to learn more about tonight's topic, and so I hope you'll consider purchasing your copy of Professor Young's book tonight from our partners at Third Place Books. Keep it local, and just maybe the things we love about Seattle from before the pandemic will still be around to delight us on the other side. All right, on to tonight's program. Elliott Young is professor in the history department at Lewis and Clark College in Portland. He's the author of Alien Nation, Chinese Migration in the Americas from the Coolie Era through World War II, published in 2014, and Caterino Garza's Revolution on the Texas-Mexico border, published in 2004. He was also the co-editor of Continental Crossroads, Remapping the U.S.-Mexico Borderlands History. In 2003, he co-founded Tepoztlan Institute for Transnational History of the Americas, and his writings appeared in the Huffington Post, the Oregonian, and the Reader, and he has provided expert testimony for over 200 asylum cases. Myra Machado was 5 when she and her mother crossed illegally to the United States, fleeing bombings in their village during the final years of El Salvador's Civil War. A mother of 3, Myra lives and works for a nonprofit in San Salvador, El Salvador. As detailed in the LA Times, she's been separated from her children twice by the US government, most recently in 2018 for re-entering the States after her first deportation. Hers is one of the stories detailed in the book will be being discussed this evening. That book is Forever Prisoners, How the United States Made the World's Largest Immigration Detention System. Please join me in welcoming Elliott Young and Myra Machado.
Good evening. I want to thank Seattle Town Hall for inviting us both here, and especially Myra Machado for coming and sharing this evening with us from El Salvador. And this is an auspicious moment. The inauguration of our new president, Joe Biden, happened today, and everything seems brighter. The sun was shining in Portland, and I feel lighter. So hopefully we will be seeing brighter days going forward. I want to share my screen, and then I will show you some slides as we talk. Okay, so the United States locks up more than 500,000 foreigners every year for immigration-related offenses. As of last year, more than 50,000 immigrants, men, women, and children were being caged in hundreds of ICE detention facilities on any given day. But we know these grim statistics. What the numbers don't tell us are the stories of the families who've been torn apart, of the people who've spent years behind bars for simply seeking a better life in this country, or the fear that the people live in even when they get out of incarceration. The book, Forever Prisoners, is a history of how, where, and why non-citizens were put behind bars in the United States from the late 19th century to the present, and how this country ended up building the world's largest immigrant detention system. I mostly wanted to tell stories of individuals and families that have been caught in the gears of a detention and deportation machine that chews up and spits out immigrants at an alarming rate. And so the book does this through 5 distinct stories that move chronologically through time and cover different types of incarceration. And I'm briefly going to just touch on each of these 5 stories before we get on to the conversation with Myra. In the mid-1880s, Chinese were being purged from towns up and down the Pacific coast, spurred on by angry white working-class mobs and government officials who feared economic competition and who viewed the Chinese as a danger to the purity of America as a white ethno-state. This poster was from the anti-Chinese purge that happened in Tacoma, just to the south of Seattle. In the wake of those pogroms, increasing numbers of Chinese were being picked up for unauthorized presence in the country and sent to the remote McNeil Island prison off the coast of Seattle. Judges were invoking the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, the first piece of federal immigration restrictionist legislation, but they were also being sentenced to 6 months of hard labor at the prison. Even though unauthorized presence was not a criminal offense then, they were being given criminal penalties without the benefit of a judicial trial, in clear violation of the constitutional right to due process. After their 6-month punishment had expired, US government marshals attempted to return the Chinese to Canada from whence they came, in the language of the Chinese Exclusion Act. Ever since the Chinese Exclusion Act prohibited the entry of Chinese laborers, Chinese used Canada, Mexico, and Cuba as springboards to enter the US clandestinely. However, Canada had established its own restrictions against the Chinese, which was a head tax required to be paid by every Chinese person who entered the country. And so when the Chinese brought by the marshals could not pay the head tax, the Canadians refused their entry, and the Chinese were sent back to McNeil Island facing indefinite detention. So this happened from the mid-1880s, and for years, scores of Chinese were being piled up at the prison on McNeil Island while the government figured out what to do with them. Finally, in 1890, the first deportations of Chinese back to China began from McNeil Island, sparking 130 years of detentions and deportations. Several of the Chinese in that original group died while awaiting deportation at McNeil Island, and so their last days on this earth were spent behind bars. In the early 20th century, millions of Europeans were being processed through Ellis Island. One of those was Nathan Cohen, a Russian Jew who had lived for several years in Brazil. Cohen went to live with his uncle in rural Georgia, but within a few months, his family members swindled him out of his business venture. His wife left him for his best friend, and Cohen was left broke and bereft. He sunk into a deep depression, and he became mute. He was finally sent to a public mental hospital in Baltimore where doctors declared him insane. Immigration agents ordered his deportation, citing the ban on entry of insane aliens. So Cohen was then escorted to Ellis Island and a few months later put on a ship going to Brazil. However, once he arrived in Brazil, the Brazilians refused to allow him to enter. The ship continued down the coast to Argentina. The Argentines also refused to allow him to enter. They contacted officials in the Russian government, but Russia didn't want to have anything to do with Cohen, who was a Jew. And at that point, Russia was in the midst of trying to expel Jews from their country. And so this mute, depressed man's story ends up getting picked up in the US press, who refer to him as the wandering Jew and the man without a country. Or as this Pittsburgh press story put it, he has no address, belongs nowhere, is wanted nowhere. Cohen was returned to New York on the same ship and spent many more months locked up on Ellis Island. When the government attempted to deport him a second time, the same thing happened as before, and Cohen ended up back in New York Harbor. Only this time, the US government issued orders not to even allow him off the ship, because if he was allowed off the ship, the ability to make claims and legal protections increased. With the intercession of the Hebrew Immigrant Aid and Sheltering Society, HIAS, and fraternal organizations, the Knights of Pythias, Cohen was finally allowed to land when these organizations committed to paying for his upkeep at a private sanitarium called McFarland's. Within the year, Nathan Cohen, who was only in his mid-30s at the time, had died. He was buried in Staten Island, and the newspaper quipped that the man who had no home had finally found a resting place in the country that refused him. Aside from the tragic and epic nature of Cohen's story, it points to a larger truth that huge numbers of foreigners and citizens were being incarcerated in mental hospitals in the first half of the 20th century. In fact, far more immigrants were locked up in so-called insane asylums than in immigrant detention facilities or even jails and prisons. This chart shows the orange part shows mental hospitals, and the blue bar shows correctional facilities, jails, and prisons. And you could see in the early to mid 20th century, by far the greatest number of people were being incarcerated in mental hospitals, not in prisons or jails. And around 1960, they begin to empty out the mental institutions, and we get the rise starting in the 1980s of mass incarceration. So essentially, they just flipped those institutions, but the people who would have been in mental hospitals in the early 20th century end up in prisons today. And in terms of incarceration rates, if you include mental hospitals, the early to mid 20th century rivals our own moment of mass incarceration. So moving on to World War II. During World War II, the US engaged in a secretive program in Latin America to kidnap Japanese, Germans, and Italians living there and forcibly bring them to the United States. They were labeled enemy aliens based on no evidence and held in INS detention camps in Texas and New Mexico. They were supposed to be used as pawns for a prisoner exchange with American civilians held by Axis powers. And this is the chapter where I follow the story of Seiichi Higashide and his family, who ended up in a camp in Crystal City, Texas, which coincidentally is 40 miles from Dilley, Texas, where ICE currently detains families from Central America. After the war, Peru refused to accept the Japanese Peruvians, even ones who had been born in Peru. And thus they remained as quasi-stateless people who were forced into farm labor camps until they could resolve their immigration situation. By 1953, Congress acted to allow these Japanese Peruvians to gain legal residence, but they were never included in the 1988 Civil Liberties Act, which provided reparations to interned Japanese Americans. This episode during World War II demonstrates how national security, foreign policy, and immigration law came together, leading to the incarceration of immigrants. While the Japanese Peruvians were not typical immigrants, in fact, they did not come to this country voluntarily at all, they were labeled as illegal entrants by the government and placed in INS detention camps. So I want to reiterate, the US government essentially kidnaps them in Peru at gunpoint, forces them on ships, and takes their passports away, brings them to the United States, and when they land in the United States, they say, oh, you have no authorization to be here, so you're an illegal entrant, and therefore we will put you in immigration detention. Franz Kafka would be proud of the bizarre sort of legal situation they found themselves in. In 1954, the INS decides to shift its immigration policies. They announce a new policy that they would end immigrant detention at seaports. However, at the very same time, millions of Mexicans on the southern border were being arrested, detained for short periods of time, and deported from the country. Immigrant detention did not so much end as shift location and focus more on one group, Mexicans, which still to this day remains the predominant group caught up in immigration detention and deportation. Then in the 1970s, thousands of Haitians began to arrive in Florida, fleeing political violence at home. And instead of welcoming these largely Black refugees, they were placed in mass detention camps and almost universally denied asylum. In 1980, a massive boatload of Cubans from the port of Mariel arrived in Florida. This group, like the Haitians before them, were largely poor and darker skinned. They too were placed in mass detention camps on military bases around the country, including, coincidentally enough, at McNeil Island Prison. So you have this thing where McNeil Island Prison is kind of the beginning on the west coast of the one of the places where immigrants were detained. And then in the 1980s, it becomes another place where Cubans, of course, many thousands of miles away, are flown there and held at McNeil Island. Most of the Mariel refugees were paroled into the United States, but some of them committed criminal offenses, mostly low-level drug charges, before they had a chance to legalize their immigration status. So after serving their time for these low-level offenses, the Cubans were not let free, but were declared ineligible for asylum because of this criminal charge. And so they were sent directly to Atlanta Penitentiary and a federal immigration detention center in Oakdale, Louisiana, pending deportation. And Oakdale, Louisiana today is a place where many immigrants find themselves, especially many Central Americans. The problem was that Cuba refused to accept them. And so they ended up languishing in prison for years, some more than a decade, waiting for deportation that would never come because Cuba would not accept them. Finally, in November of 1987, the US negotiated the return of over 2,000 of these Mariel refugees. When the Cubans heard their deportation was imminent, they seized the prisons in Oakdale and Atlanta. They seized over 100 guards as hostages. They began torching the buildings in the prison. Here you see an image of Atlanta prison in flames. This is an image from Atlanta penitentiary of the Cubans once they had taken over the prison. Here's another image. This is during the uprising, where they're together with an FBI agent showing off some of the homemade weapons that they had made during their seizure of the prison. In this image, you see the Cubans on top of the prison with a US and Cuban flag and a Santa Claus, because this is, it was November, it was coming up around the time of Christmas. And then at the same time, these Cubans, many of whom had married American citizens, had US citizen children, their families would hold vigils for them outside of the prison. And here is one of those vigils where some of the family members, the children of the Cubans on the inside, are dressed up. This one is dressed up as the Statue of Liberty, and behind it, the building there is the Atlanta Penitentiary. So after 2 weeks, the longest prison takeover in the history of the United States ended with the US government finally agreeing to individual reviews for their cases. And the Cubans were handcuffed, let out of the prison, and then they were distributed around the country to other prisons. And finally, they were given reviews, and eventually many of them were deported to Cuba. The story of the Mariel Cubans reveals the increasing linking of criminal and immigration law that began in the 1980s. Following the prison uprising, Congress would enact laws that increasingly tied immigration and criminal law together, leading to an ever wider net for immigrant detention and deportation. And this finally brings us to Myra's story, the final story of the book. Mayra Machado is a Salvadoran who was brought to this country when she was just 5 years old. She was brought up as American as anyone could be in Southern California. By the time she was an adult, she was living in Arkansas. At 18 years of age, while still a teenager, she wrote a hot check and was charged for that. Even though the judge recognized that this was a first-time offense, she ended up with a suspended 10-year sentence of stacked charges, all resulting from that original hot check. And so she ends up with this crazy criminal record for someone who, as a teenager, made a mistake. A decade later, in 2015, she was picked up on a minor traffic violation. But by this time, what had changed is Obama had expanded the programs that deputized local law enforcement as immigration agents. And so instead of paying for a traffic ticket, she was taken from her 3 US citizen children and put in detention in Louisiana. I was contacted by a lawyer and helped in her asylum case as an expert witness on country conditions in El Salvador, but that case was denied and she was deported in early 2017. In El Salvador, when she was returned there, she faced harassment by government officials and gang members who threatened her with sexual assault. Fearing for her life and missing her children, she returned to the US after a few months in El Salvador, and a year later was again picked up on another traffic violation and again was sent to detention in rural Louisiana. And this is a heartbreaking image of Myra in her Arkansas hearing on January 18th, 2019, and you see her the backs of her children there. It was in the GEO-run ICE facility that Myra organized her own legal filings to represent herself for asylum. And in April of that year, She had my number from having worked on the case in 2017. She called me out of the blue and asked me if I would be willing to serve as her expert witness. And I agreed. I managed to secure her a pro bono lawyer, a law school professor from Loyola University in New Orleans, Isabel Medina. We went down, did the hearing in the LaSalle Detention Center in Gina, Louisiana, but she lost her case again. And this is an image of Myra Machado's mother and sister and two of her children, Dominic and Dayanara, outside of the Geo-run ICE detention center and that's at the day of the hearing. And crazy story, when we went in to the ICE detention center, the lawyer had already arranged for the children to be present at the hearing, and the ICE guard said, no, the children won't be allowed in, and they threatened to arrest the lawyer, arrest all of us. When we took this picture in front of the facility, they ran out and again threatened to arrest us. And so there was continuing harassment, not only against Myra, but against anyone who was seen as helping or supporting her in her appeal. Her case was denied. The lawyer made an appeal to the Fifth Circuit Court, but while her appeal was still pending, and to this day it's still pending, in the middle of the night, she was called and she was put on a plane back to El Salvador, where she lives today, still separated from her 3 young children. Myra's case reveals the problematic Obama-era policies that said they were focusing enforcement on, quote, felons, not families. Myra, of course, is both a felon based on that hot check charge, and she is a mother. The ways in which the laws had changed and invented new categories like aggravated felony served to criminalize people like Myra, who do not pose a threat to anyone. The title of this book comes from the name that journalists have given the prisoners who have been held at Guantanamo for almost 2 decades without any charges or convictions. Although most immigrants are not like the prisoners in Guantanamo in that most immigrants come to the United States voluntarily, the people in Guantanamo often face indefinite detention, like the immigrants, many immigrants in our prisons and detention centers around the country today. And they are in a situation of rightlessness that follows them even if they are released from that detention. And so the punchline or the message of this book is that the United States, which once prided itself on being a nation of immigrants, has become instead a nation of immigrant prisons. So I will stop sharing the slides now and invite Myra into a conversation with me. In many ways, I think Myra is at the center of this entire book, is the hero of the book, and shows that immigrants have really been the protagonists in their own struggle for freedom. There are people who could help, lawyers, other people who could help, but it's really people like Myra and many other immigrants who have been the most active in fighting for their freedom. And as we heard before, Myra is coming to us from San Salvador, the capital of El Salvador, and she is doing work to reunite children who have been deported with their parents in the United States. So welcome, Myra.
Thank you guys so much for having me. My name is Mayra Machado. Thank you so much, Seattle Town Hall, for having us. Elliott, I'm forever grateful for you allowing me to express and share my experience that I've had with
Sure.
immigration.
So because it's this incredible day, you know, where we felt a couple of weeks ago that we were about to lose the democracy in this country, and finally we have a new president. I wanted to start with that and just ask you, how are you feeling today with a new President Biden? Are you feeling hopeful that maybe he will be able to resolve your situation?
I am actually very excited to see what Biden's agenda is going to be, not just for my situation, but for the millions of TPS holders who are currently in limbo trying to figure out if they're going to get to stay with their family or if they have to figure out how they're going to come back, as well as the several dreamers we have all around the country that, you know, have been there their whole life. They're just like me, somebody who didn't ask their parents to migrate them, but their parents did for a better life. And now they're wondering what's going to happen. How are they going to move forward? How can they stay there legally for the rest of their life instead of just temporarily? So I'm very excited to see what he has to offer, what his agenda is, what his plan is. Are we going to abolish ICE finally, or what's going to happen?
Great. So this book gives the longer history of detention, but I think you have experienced this detention for years and years, and I'm wondering if you could describe for us, what is it like to be in ICE detention in this country?
Very depressing. I was held in Gina, Louisiana at LaSalle Detention Facility. I was housed in a room for up to 82 women, bunk beds all around, an open dorm. They did split us up from time to time and put, 40 and 40 together because sometimes women cannot all get along. So at times it's very depressing. You're constantly asked to go see a psych doctor to see if they put you on medication. And, if you tell them that you don't sleep, I had a huge problem with my anxiety, my insomnia. Trying to control life outside of the walls is your worst enemy. So it's just an emotional roller coaster. You cannot control what your children are doing, how they're behaving, what's going on. You cannot control anything outside those walls. And the worst thing that you could do is try to control everything that's going on outside of those walls, as well as trying to maintain communication with your child every single day and make sure that they understand that, you're not a bad person. You're just going through a bad. So that's always been very challenging, having to explain to your kids why you're not there, for them to understand that it's not something you've done, but it's just the system that we're in that won't allow me to be there with them. So that's one of the worst things that happens while in detention. And
could you describe how your deportations happen? Because I know we talked about the last one. Just bring us through, how does it happen that you all of a sudden find out that you're going to be put on a plane?
So my first deportation was January 6, 2017, my grandmother's birthday. I found out January 5th at 3:30 when I used to try to use the phone every day after 3:30, which was the 3 o'clock count. And if your phone was turned off at 3:30, you knew you were leaving. That's how you knew I'm leaving, because your account will say zero, your phone will say zero, and your commissary account is closed. So that's how we knew we were leaving. We knew that we were traveling. So I would always call. Her at that time to let them know, hey, my phone's still working. I'm here another day. So that time when I went to call, it wasn't working. So I asked my friend Julie, who's Colombian. I said, Julie, is your phone working? She said, let me try. So she tried and she said, yeah, why? And I said, mine's not working. Let me call my grandma on your account. And I called my grandma and she said, why are you calling me on Julie's account? Where's your account? I said, Mommy. I said, because I call her Mommy. I said, Mommy, my account's at zero. I don't know what I'm gonna do. And she said, oh my God, give me Julie's number, her A number. She said, give me Julie's number and how much money do you need for calls? And I said, I don't know. So she said, I'm gonna put $100 so you can call and, call me back. Give me 10 minutes. We're gonna put money. And that's how I found out I was leaving, with that phone call. And once we got funds in her phone, it was just calling my grandmother, my aunt, my mom, my kids, you know, my boyfriend, letting him know, everybody know, like, hey, I'm leaving. Calling my attorney. We had a campaign, a calling campaign to stop my deportation. We had everything and anything. I mean, my daughter called the field officer his cell phone. I don't know how we managed to get that to try to stop my deportation, and it didn't happen. So around midnight, they took me out of LaSalle and they transported me to another facility, which was the airport facility. And then we waited there until 9 a.m. in the snow. I remember being shackled and put on a plane on Con Air and leaving. And they took my shackles off when we got into international waters in Mexico. It was just a whole experience landing in El Salvador. Like you come wearing, you know, snow clothes. I mean, I had a sweater, sweatpants, and then it's blazing here, 100 and something heat, that heat that you would just never experience until you get to Central America. And it's different. It's different. My Spanish is not that great, so I sound very weird. And it's a whole experience. And that was my first deportation. My second deportation, I was actually transferred to a whole other facility, which is called Bazil. I went to the same facility in LaSalle in Louisiana. And that Thursday, they transported a handful of us girls with 80 or 100 Cubans, because we had a lot of Cubans migrate that year, and they were all being held in El Paso, and then they were just slowly distributed to different facilities. So we were overcrowded at LaSalle, so they moved us to the Bazil women's facility. And that Friday, and then that Sunday, I left again, and I landed in El Salvador on a Monday, January 13th, 2020. So the process has changed from the first time I got deported in 2017 to the process now. Now you don't, the airport is completely different. Everything's changed. So now when you, I've never seen anybody get taken off a plane because they have their gang members or they have a record or anything like that. This time they did. We were in the plane and they kept calling out names, and you had to show up and you were being arrested and put on a patrol. And I've never experienced that before. They were just, you know, they had a list and they were just going by it, and the guys were getting up and being arrested. So to me, that was just like, whoa, like these guys have, you know, there's something going on. And then they transport you and they put you on a bus and bring you to the Capitol. And then here you go through, that's just not even a process. It's just you arrive, you go check in, and then you leave. They don't. Mm-hmm. Most times, the first time I was deported without travel documents, with just a sticky note that said Mayra Machado, per Washington, D.C., deported. This time I was actually deported under Myra Jacqueline Machado Portillo. Different last name, different birth date. The girl's travel documents that I had, I mean, she was like 25, and I mean, I'm 35. We're both born in Usulutan, have the same last names. I believe her birthday was like, my birthday's May 19th, her birthday was like May 8th or 9th. But yeah, when they kept trying to repeat the country, I'm like, that's not me. That my last name's not Portillo. My last name is Machado. Like, I only have one last name, Machado. And so that was very difficult to try to explain to people that that's not you. But they're like, this is, that's not me. So it's challenging. It's been very challenging. And
yeah, one thing I wanted to ask you is about when you were still in LaSalle in Louisiana, you wanted to use your time to study to be a paralegal. And I remember you asking about trying to do a correspondence course. What happened when you attempted to try to get the coursework there?
The warden blocked me. The warden blocked me, and he wouldn't allow me to get it done because he said it was taking up resources he didn't have available for me. But Miss Williams, who was the law officer, she always helped me with everything. She was great. She always, I would ask for cases that she would even ask me, how do you even know about these cases? And she would print all cases out for me. She would research things for me. I would be like, I ended up being a law clerk before I left. And I would spend my days getting paid $3 a day to sit in the law office and fill out asylum forms, fill out residency forms, fill out pardons, fill out everything for these girls, and do translations, translate their whole testimony in English, because you know, most of these women don't know what to do. They cross the border and they feel like they ask for asylum, but it doesn't end there. There's a whole process. And sometimes your case gets picked up by a nonprofit, sometimes it gets picked up, but sometimes it doesn't. You know, you don't have anybody paying for an attorney, you don't have anybody helping you. So I didn't have anything other to do besides read law and focus on something positive. I mean, if I wasn't helping myself, I was helping somebody else.
So that raises a question about what you're doing now in El Salvador. So could you tell us a little bit about the work you're doing there?
So I started working for CIMITRA, which is a nonprofit organization in San Salvador, on March 2nd. I actually helped coordinate the Central American Minors Program, which is the program that Obama established for TPS holders to petition their children that they had left behind when they migrated 20, 30 years ago. So that program, Trump closed it. And so ERAP, which is the lawyers in New York, they set a lawsuit against Trump and they won it. So the cases that were already approved and pending travel, those got to move forward. But the program is currently closed, which we're hoping Biden reopens the program so we can start doing that process all over again, because it is amazing. So what I do is families contact me and they let me know, hey, we have a camp case, but we don't know if it's going to the next step or not. Can you check? I have access to the USCIS system and I put the case in and I get to check. And then what I do is just give them information, let them know what's going on, constantly in contact with the child, the mom, the dad, the grandma, the aunt, the uncle, you know, and sometimes they don't have travel, they don't have money to go to come from, let's say, La Union to San Salvador, which is a huge distance from us for their medical exam. So sometimes we go pick them up. A couple of 2 weeks ago, I went to the border of Honduras and El Salvador to go pick up a brother and a sister who had been separated from their parents for 23 years, and they reunited on last Tuesday, and they're in Dallas now, and they're with their mom and their dad, and it's a great program because, you know, my family's been separated. I mean, you know, I'm reverse roles now, so these families get to unite after being separated for 20 years. You know, some of them, the longest one has been 25 years, and they haven't seen their kids. They haven't been able to come to El Salvador on a parole. You know, the kids are living with an aunt and uncle. So it's great to reunite them. It's great to, you know, have them together, because I know that that's what I want. So it's an experience.
So could you we do want to open it up for questions, so maybe people could write in their questions as we're speaking, and we'll take your questions in a second. But could you talk a little bit about how you've been able to maintain contact with your children, and whether you have hope of being reunited with them?
So we family chat. We have one with their dad, and then one with just us four, because we're trying to all get along better and, you know, have a better relationship just with him as it is with me. So we have chats. I mean, we talk about everything. Sometimes my kids argue in their chats and I have to be the mediator. You know, Dominic will FaceTime me every day. Daya FaceTimes me every day. Dorian, if he's not playing Call of Duty or Fortnite, he'll want to talk to me. But, you know, we mostly all just FaceTime. That's our life. We live off of our iPhones. I mean, we share locations on our iPhones. I'm a virtual mom. I literally do life, and I'm so grateful for Apple because I get to track where they're at. I get to know what time they get to school. I get to know exactly where they're at, what they're doing, who they're with, like what location they're at. And there's nothing more that a mom wants to know is where her kids are at. So Dominic's 15, so, you know, he's exploring life and wanting to do more things. So for me, I could say yes, but I still need to know where you're at all times. And, you know, so it's been really good for me because we share our locations. You know, We share Apple playlists. We send pictures. The kids have Snap. I mean, all the kids have Snap now. We have Snapchat. We send pictures. We have a group chat in there. I mean, we try our best to have the best communication. We talk about things that we're going to do when they come visit me. I mean, I send them pictures of El Salvador and the beaches. I tell them, you guys are going to come here. We're going to do this, or we can't do that. Or, we always talk about going to Europe one day, or, just traveling and just move to Canada, Mom. That's what they tell me, but maybe one day. And yes, I do have a lot of hope of reuniting. My case is currently in the Fifth Circuit. It's been a live year. Incredible. That's not something we were expecting for them to throw it out the first couple of weeks, the first month, but it has survived litigations. We are still going. I will still keep going. I have hopes of doing an Arkansas pardon and getting that done. And if I get an Arkansas pardon, it erases all of my convictions and I can reapply again. Fortunately, getting married to somebody and then petitioning is just not something we see in the near future. So if it's not something that I do independently to come and be reunited with my kids, we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
Okay, well, maybe this is a good moment to bring in the questions from the audience, if we have any. Shane, do we have any?
So I'm Shane. I'm an event manager here at Town Hall Seattle. We invite you to ask your questions using the Ask a Question button down below, and we'll start answering those questions. But while we're waiting for them to come in, Elliott, I was wondering if you could kind of expand on sort of those Obama-era policies that you had talked about that carried forward into today, and then sort of with the inauguration today, how you think Biden and Harris policies will impact immigrant detention and other policies in the future. Sorry, you were muted there for a second.
Obama came in and he had plans that he's going to do comprehensive immigration reform, but the bargain he made was that he's going to do increased border security as a way to show that he's sort of tough, as a way to get the Republicans to compromise on this immigration reform. It didn't work. The Republicans didn't play ball with him. And so Obama ended up expanding these programs, which had existed before, but really expanded them, that deputized local law enforcement as immigration agents. So Myra was picked up, the original charge for the hot check. Her immigration status never came up. And that was true for most people picked up on criminal offenses. It wasn't integrated with immigration law. But when, by the time of Obama, then when Myra gets picked up in 2015, the local police officer is now deputized as an ICE agent and runs her information through the system, finds out that she is, doesn't have authorization, and that sets in motion this whole deportation. So that, combined with the fact that if you had a criminal charge like the one she had, it was considered an aggravated felony, which made it virtually impossible to apply for asylum, which is why she's been denied so many times in the courts. And so that the fear now is that that Biden will continue those Obama era policies of doing things for Dreamers and DACA, but then not doing things really helping people like in Myra's situation, who might have a criminal record, but who are clearly not a threat to anyone or a danger, and who have just been caught up in this this horrible situation. Myra, do you want to add anything to that?
Called the 287G in Washington County, in Arkansas, that they had that, and this last year in 2020 they actually finally got rid of it. So one county has it, you go to the next county and that county doesn't have it. So one of my cases is actually, it's been a the case to follow in that section of Arkansas, because it was such a single mom of 3 who works at a doctor's office, gets separated from her 3 children, this is what that program is doing. It's not, helping you weed out the criminals. It's helping you weed out the mom that had something in the past. And now these kids are left without a parent. So I'm very grateful that they finally got rid of that in Arkansas. I was actually talking to my son Dominic about that today and explaining that to him. And he was like, whoa, that's right. They don't have that anymore, So, my case has been very hurtful to us, but I feel like it's helped a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the other movement that has happened, which goes back to the 1980s, but got reinvigorated recently, especially when Trump came into office, was the sanctuary city movement, sanctuary jurisdictions. And what that does is say local law enforcement will not do immigration enforcement. So it basically separates those two functions. And if that had been in place in 2015, Myra would be with her kids this whole time, probably.
If I picked up in Santa Ana, California, and gone to Theo Lacey facility, I would have been home. I would have had a bond in the first 72 hours I was being held. But I was not. I was picked up in Fayetteville, Arkansas. So it's just a difference. It's different. Every state is different. Every state has different policies. And, unfortunately, I was arrested in the wrong state. I even tried to get my case moved from LaSalle to move to Theo Lacey. We even had a field officer who, I make friends with everybody. So I had a field officer who really tried his best to move me. My grandma was battling cancer at the time. She was still alive. My grandma passed away when I was in detention in 2019, and that was horrific for us. She raised me, so that was really, really bad. So he even tried, we got all her letters from her doctor. He tried to move me, and then we couldn't. They said that LaSalle was my last stop because the next time I went anywhere was to El Salvador.
And one of the things to note here is that it entirely depends on which state you're in, the chances you will get asylum. So in Louisiana, you virtually have no chance. There are judges some judges have 100% denial rate. So no matter what the case, they're going to deny it. If you're in New York or San Francisco, you have a much better chance. And so this is a very arbitrary system. Immigration judges are more like political appointees. They're not really independent. The Justice Department puts pressure to get certain results. And it's very unlike, the criminal justice system has its own problems, but the immigration asylum system is much more messed up. And really, that's one of the things, hopefully going forward, that they could reform.
I had one of my prosecutors during my case was from New York, and he said, they asked him, do you have any objections? He said, no. And then when we were done, he said, I know your attorney's not here, but can I ask you something? I said, yeah, go ahead. And he said, how do you know so much of law? And I said, I just read. I read the book. That's all I do. So he said, yeah, you should be going home soon. And then they switched him and they gave me a Louisiana prosecutor in the next court, because that tends to happen. Like, you'll have one prosecutor, then they'll switch you to another prosecutor. So they never have consistency. So I had this New York one who was in 2 of my hearings. So then the third hearing, it's a different one. So.
Mm-hmm. Elliott, could you talk a little bit more about, we went from locking people up in insane asylums to mass incarceration. Could you talk a little bit more about that shift, and then sort of what we saw during the Trump administration with the essentially detention camps separating families and mothers and kids from each other? So if you could speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah, so I think getting this long historical view, you could see that over time there have been different kinds of institutions where people are incarcerated. The emptying out of the insane asylums or the mental hospitals was because of a critique of how those hospitals were treating patients there. And so for good reason, people especially in the 1960s were saying, you've got to let these people out. But what ended up happening is many of the people who have mental illness end up on the street. They're not being treated, and they very quickly come into contact with police, and they end up in prison. So today, a third to a half of the people in jails and prisons have mental illness. So basically what we've done is instead of putting these people in hospitals and treating them, they end up in prisons. But you could see when you look at the whole 20th century that the rates of incarceration at the beginning of the 20th century are similar to what they are now if you consider all of these institutions. In terms of the camps that have been set up, for families and for children, of course, this predates Trump. Under Obama, we also had those children in cages, families in cages. I think the Trump twist on this was to actually rip children from infants from their mothers and their fathers, and send the kid to one institution, maybe send the kid, give them parole, put them in foster families. So basically separating families. And now there's this huge effort, because they didn't keep track of where these kids went, where the parents went, to reunite these families is a process that's still ongoing. And this was a conscious policy. This is not a mistake. This was a policy that they did to basically to try to deter people from coming. So basically torturing people, separating families as a sadistic means to stop people who are fleeing violence from coming to this country and seeking asylum, which is a U.S. law. It's not only international law, it is part of U.S. law that people are allowed to come to this country and seek asylum.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I wanted to ask you, Myra, recently you were approached by the Avena Foundation, the Ford Foundation, as nominated as one of select people around the world for a fellowship. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, a fellowship, and what it means?
Yes, I have been nominated for a Ford Fellowship. They have normally 400 applicants, and there's 48 people left. Out of those 48 people, 10 people get picked, and it's an 18-month program. It'll run from October 2021 till March 2023, I believe. But it's amazing to know that, I mean, I was even nominated, like I'm nobody, I'm just Myra, so it's been very touching. It's an amazing experience to even be nominated in such a huge platform. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see what happens if I get lucky and, we get to go to the next round or the next round after that. But being nominated on its own, I feel like that's just, to me, I mean, it's speechless. Like I've been here a year. Granted, I'm not out here saving the world, but, I feel like with COVID and everything, having to work from home and just virtually talking to everybody and helping them with their case, moving from one location to another, and just helping people reunite. It's just such a amazing feeling. So I'm just grateful I have a job, I could be in a different situation, and I'm just grateful that I'm in a decent one.
Yeah, and one of the other things that you've done from El Salvador is help as a paralegal with people who you knew who were in detention in Louisiana. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, maybe?
So, during COVID, I have a lot of friends who are stateless. A lot of people from Haiti and the Bahamas who they couldn't get their travel documents. So I did a lot of habeas for them in order for them to get released. With COVID happening, a friend of a friend gave a friend of another friend my number. So I have an Arkansas phone number, so I share with a lot of people, and I helped 6 people come home with an ankle monitor, but they're home. So that's just a blessing in itself. And I have some people, I do paralegal work. I sometimes fill out forms for people. from here to Arkansas, from here to Dallas, from here to California. I have some people call me from facilities, so when I see that number, I'm like, who's calling me? You know, and it's the traditional, you have a collect call from. So it's just nice to help people because, you know, when I was going through it, I didn't know anything. I had no idea what immigration was. I had no idea that there were so many opportunities for me to have fixed my status way before even going through immigration. And I feel like most of us who get brought to the States, we don't know how to fix our status. And I do hope that more kids are learning that, hey, you are a dreamer. Hey, you are a TPS recipient. You are, after being TPS for so long, if you marry somebody that's a resident or a citizen, they can petition for you. There's so many different outlets for you to become legal in the States. And I feel like our parents try to shield us, you know, in the 90s and the early 2000s, because immigration was not such a big issue as it is now. It's not something you talk about it at the dinner table, and now it's just something you talk about it on a global platform. So, you know, I do hope that these kids get all the information they need. They ask the questions like, hey, I don't have a social. What is a social? How can I get a social? Hey, how come I can't go and travel to Mexico like all my cousins? You know, how can I fix my situation? So, you know, I really do wish I had that growing up. Probably would have been a citizen by now. So.
Yeah. So I just want to, I know we're coming to the end of our time here, but if you want to learn more about Myra's story, the book has a whole chapter dedicated to her story. You could read about her tremendous struggle, which you've heard about tonight, and also many other stories of immigrants who are fighting against this inhumane detention system. So thank you, Shane, for inviting us and allowing us to share a little bit of the book.
Absolutely, and I want to thank both you and Myra for being with us this evening. Any final words before we conclude?
Hoping for a better era these next 4 years.
Yeah, I think a better era, and I'm committed to getting Myra back reunited with her children. I know Dominic is on the call tonight watching, so shout out to Dominic and other kids, and we're going to make it happen for your mom. We're going to make Joe Biden do the right thing.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And again, thanks for being with us this evening. If you enjoyed this event, you can find many more like it on our website, townhallseattle.org. We hope you'll consider making a donation, as your support will allow us to continue to provide events just like this one. If you're interested in purchasing a copy of Elliott's book, Forever Prisoners: How the United States Made the World's Largest Immigrant Detention System, please use the link on this live stream page to purchase through our friends at Third Place Books here in Seattle. And again, thanks for being here. Have a